Hey, everybody. I'm Chris Metzler, Director of Programming here at the Green Film Festival, San Francisco. Thanks for being here. It's really neat to kind of be back and kind of showing some of the more interesting environmentally themed documentaries and narrative and midnight movies from around the world. We're lucky enough to have filmmaker Luke Griswold here. Hey, Luke, how are you doing?
I'm doing great up here in Anchorage, Alaska right now,
Oh,
working.
very nice. I guess not so too different from the climate where your film was shot, huh?
It's quite a bit warmer here than where my climate film was shot.
Yeah.
Pleistocene Park is north of the Arctic Circle. It's a different world actually.
Well,
Anchorage is tropical compared to where my film was shot.
well, this is maybe a good place to start. Is it so? How did you find yourself pursuing this story and kind of going down the rabbit hole of you know, knowing that this was kind of the documentary you wanted to make?
This was 2012, I think, and I had wrapped up my first film, and it was finally, had worked its way through festivals and stuff, and the promotion part of it was wrapping up, and I wanted to get rolling on a new project. And I read this article about my subject, Sergei Zimov, and it kind of blew my mind that here's this crazy Russian in the middle of nowhere recreating the ice age by introducing big woolly animals to the tundra, and that this, may help with climate change. And he drives around in a tank, knocking trees over and pretending it's a woolly mammoth as as an experiment. And I was blown away by this. It sounded perfect. It sounded very cinematic. And I thought like, okay, this will be a great film. My last film was like, I'm quite proud of my previous film, but it's an obscure subject matter. It was certainly like a challenge to fund. And I'm like, okay, this is like high profile. This will be way easier to fund. I'm going with it. I'm going for it. I was very naive about it being easier to fund.
Well, it wound up turning into a really beautiful, film. What did you have any hesitancy? I guess. I mean, I'm sure part of the, excitement of the film is to kind of go to, in kind of a far-flung place in the world. But like, were there certain challenges that you kind of anticipated and tried to plan for, or did you just kind of make it up as you go along?
I winged it. I've traveled quite a bit, and I was thought, oh, Russia, it's kind of European. This is before the annexation of Crimea and the big political blow. This is 2013, so like it was maybe the best moment for geopolitical relations between the U.S. and Russia. And I've traveled a lot. I'll figure it out. And I showed up, and I'm like, oh wow, I did try to study a little bit of Russian. It turned out I had not been very successful. In the Russian Far East, in particular, no one speaks English. The alphabet isn't the hardest thing, but it is a different alphabet, and it takes some figuring out. And things just like nothing makes sense. And I'm like, oh whoa, I should have done more research. I'm in way over my head here. Like just figuring out what a grocery store is. You walk through these in Eastern Siberia in particular, these cities are completely bombed out. And there are these, Soviet apartment blocks. Nothing's been fixed or reconstructed since the collapse of the Soviet Union. And it just is like, whoa, where's the grocery store? And it turns out it's like in the basement of a apartment complex, totally indistinguishable from the rest of the bombed out apartment complexes. And you just like, I just want to get like, some food and a beer, and I can't figure out like what a grocery store is here. Russian people also, this is a stereotype, but it's kind of true. Like people come across as really grumpy when you're just like walking down the street. You're just like, oh man, are they gonna like kick my ass? Like what's going on here? Like everyone looks really surly. And it turns out people are actually, once you engage them, incredibly friendly and hospitable, but superficially people are really grouchy.
And
Um,
I can imagine that there must be kind of just an excitement of discovery of like, how do you think these challenges of being in a new place and navigating it personally, but also, I mean, kind of difficult climate situation. How do you think that kind of informed the way that you made the film and what we see on screen?
um, I mean, I think I want to say it was an artistic decision, but I think it was actually just the way things worked out given my resources. The film, I think, has a pretty sort of scrappy, gritty feeling to it. You're definitely immersed in what's going on. Um, and so I think this, like, as an audience, and I hope this comes across to the audience, like I kind of just got thrown in there and had to sink or swim. And I hope the audience also gets a little bit of this feeling of like, oh, whoa, like, what am I dealing with here? Like that's my aesthetic hope that's, I think, born out of necessity. Although I think I like that aesthetically. I've worked with other filmmakers that everything they do is very planned and very thought through, like nothing is serendipitous. And they get really beautiful imagery, but it's a different feeling of film. Like it's a really different feeling of film. And I don't want to criticize, it's just a different style, but that's not how I do it, both out of preference and out of necessity.
Yeah. Well, I think it turned out well, and I think there's like the kind of serendipitous feeling that you allude to. I think just seems to kind of be, kind of part of the living, breathing nature, of the film. When you started this, was there any concern of like, where's this project that that he was developing going to go, in the sense of like, okay, or was it one of those things where just like, well, this is just so interesting and different, it's going to just head somewhere? I mean, in the sense of like, did you know what story you wanted to follow, or?
I didn't. And when I first started the project, I was just like, this is so amazing. It's going to be incredible. Like, I'm going to go shoot some exploratory footage, like put together a fundraising reel. Like the money is going to roll in. I'm going to get like a nice professional crew. Like, who am I going to hire? Who am I going to hire as a cinematographer? Like someone better than me. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be awesome. Like, this is mind blowing. And then a few things happened. I showed up and I allude to this in the film, but it became clear that Pleistocene Park was sort of a little bit stuck and not progressing very much. They'd done some big things in the past, and then they had gotten sort of bogged down in, their day-to-day living, some cynicism about the world's engagement with what they were doing. They hadn't gotten a lot of press coverage for a while. They got a wave of press coverage around like 2006 through 2008, and then they'd sort of slid off the radar as the media tends to move on to new and exciting things. And so they made some big efforts to expand the project, and those efforts had had like some really mixed success, and the end result had been kind of a wash. And it was frustrating. It was the sense of like, wow, how am I going to make a movie out of this? And then also the fundraising part, didn't work out as smoothly as I had hoped. It turned out to be much more challenging. So between those two things, yeah, there's like a few years of working on this film where I kept going back and kept hoping something would happen. Nikita would like tease me about it. He's like, well, Luke, if you're waiting for us to accomplish something, you might have a long wait. When I first showed up, Nikita, it turned out, I didn't know this at the time, but Nikita and his father had gotten in a argument. I mean, they argue a lot. They're like both intense people, where Nikita was like, Dad, we can't invite this journalist. The park isn't ready for showing to people. Like we need to like accomplish something first. And Sergey, the father, said like, no, Nikita, we will invite him, and just overruled his son. So Nikita went and picked me up at the airport, and he's like, I will take you to talk to my father. And what he didn't say is like, my father's the one who wanted to invite a journalist, not me. And he just drops me off at his father's house, and his father is like, what do you want to film? And I'm like, well, I want to film you, doing your work, like doing scientific research, building Pleistocene Park, bringing animals, constructing fences, like the physical and the intellectual work of creating this thing you're creating. And he says like, well, every morning I wake up, I have a cup of coffee, instant coffee, because the caffeine content, the molecular structure is the same, and instant coffee is quicker. Then I smoke a cigarette. Then I sit on the couch and I think. Then I drink another instant coffee and smoke another cigarette, and I sit on the couch and I think. Every day I drink 20 cups of instant coffee and smoke 20 cigarettes, and I sit on the couch and I think. You can make a movie about this, but it will be an extremely boring movie. And I'm, okay, how do I deal with this? And then he's like, Nikita, take this journalist to the park. So Nikita got stuck with me. after all of this, while Sergey sat on the couch and thought. And he's a pretty intimidating dude. So for the first year in particular, I was like, oh, better not bug Zimov. He's sitting on his couch, drinking coffee, smoking cigarettes, and thinking. And like as I got to know him better, I mean, he's still an intimidating guy, but I kind of got to understand he's not as grumpy as he acts, or maybe he is as grumpy as he acts, but he's not as intimidating as he likes to be.
Do you think it would? Did you guys see yourself, I guess, in the sense of some of the challenges that they had in pursuing this kind of big dream of theirs? Did you was there kind of some kismet, I guess, in the same challenges of making a documentary? In the sense of like both of them seem like they require this leap of faith, I guess.
Yeah, it's funny because you'll see this in the film. I ended up helping them in accomplishing their project, and there's a coda to that. And on one hand, what they're doing is easier, especially like the things everyone thinks is hard, like transporting animals and wrangling animals and slogging through knee-deep mud. Honestly, I would rather slog through knee-deep mud than write a fundraising proposal, like any day of the week. It's so much less painful. Like, or spend, like 40 days in a semi truck with, 12 bison driving across 2 continents. Like, it's so much easier than fundraising and like the endless emails and administrative things that come along with a film that aren't actual filmmaking. I mean, they're a big part. They're what I spend most of my time doing as a filmmaker is actually, neither editing nor filming. That said, in this time period, in like 9 years it took me to finish the film, I did in fact finish a film, and they've been working, Zimov has been working on this project for the last 30 years, longer depending what you count as the start date, like late Soviet times. And his son was like born into it and has been working on it his whole life. So on some like really obvious level, what they're doing is just so much bigger and more challenging than making a film.
Very nice. And is there kind of a postscript for the film? Since you finished the film, what's happened there, and what are kind of some of your kind of next potential future journeys?
Well, for the film itself and for the Zimovs, of course, Russia invaded Ukraine and started, something verging on World War III. And that's had tremendous impacts on them. Like Russia, there's quite serious censorship in Russia now. B, they supported themselves by hosting foreign scientists and facilitating their research. If you're, I don't know, a German or an American scientist and you want to study climate change in the Arctic, you go to their research station, you pay them a daily fee to stay there. They have like a chef on staff and they have all the beer you can drink, and they'll like transport you to their research sites, and then they'll tell you why your experimental design is stupid and will never work in the real Arctic, and help you like redesign it because they've done all these things. And they may actually just like give you an experimental idea that will get you an article published in Science or Nature, because they've been thinking about these things and living there. So it's and that's how they make their money, is people come and it's like not cheap to go do Arctic research. And so all Europeans within 5 days of the start of their war just like cut everything. There were experiments, like expensive experiments with like these towers and generators running and sensors monitoring CO2 and methane in a marsh outside of the research station that had been going for upwards of 20 years, like a 20-year data set, and just like cut, like experiment over. 20 years of like, I don't know how many scientists, like probably 20 different scientists had been working on this project for 20 years. And It's just like over suddenly. Nikita kept that, I don't know if it's still running, but he kept the experiment going, hoping that some of these scientists will be able to convince their political, whoever's behind them politically making the decisions that this is actually critical research, and despite the geopolitics ought to continue. So he's still running these experiments at his own expense. And at the same time, the Americans, just like Nikita heard nothing from the Americans he's working with, and he's on several big contracts with like NASA and NOAA and the National Science Foundation. funding, scientists at like University of Alaska who in turn have projects going at his station. And Nikita's like, oh man, the Americans are gonna cancel too. I'm not even gonna read my email. And like nothing, no comment from the Americans. And he's like, it's better they don't even talk to me. It's too depressing. And then he gets an email from someone who's like, hey, are you gonna send us that invoice or what? We need to pay you. And Nikita's like, can they still pay me? What about the sanctions? Will this work? Like, I'm like, Nikita, send them the invoice right away. Do not wait, because they might not be able to pay you tomorrow.
Right.
So far, they're still like on a very limited basis. Their American collaborators, or some American collaborators, are able to continue, financing experiments going that they are taking care of. And that's kind of their lifeline for keeping things going as things stand right now. And
Yeah.
it could end tomorrow. It's like totally unclear how long that will go. But that's, not only keeping some really critical science going, it's also their personal income, which they then, plow back into keeping Pleistocene Park going.
Right.
So Pleistocene Park is kind of in survival mode. Nikita actually was making some pretty good progress in the last couple of years and had like big plans for this summer. He was going to bring 30 muskox this summer. And so that's all like done, but he has enough money to just like, keep taking care of the animals, pay someone to stay out there and watch them for the next like year or two. And then he'll, reassess where he is financially.
Very cool. And what are next steps for you? I guess you're traveling around with the film, and do you have another project in mind, or?
Yeah, so it's ironic. I have someone offered to. This is very early stages, so I'm not sure anything will come of this. But someone asked me about, now that this war started, why doesn't someone start a Pleistocene Park in Alaska? And my answer was, well, it's complicated in Alaska. There's a lot more regulation in Alaska and America than in Russia. Like really, it's not that there's no regulation in Russia. That's kind of a misconception I had in the beginning of the project. But regulation in Russia is much more flexible and lax. And in Alaska, like it's pretty intense, and there's a lot of people thinking about like every plot of land in Alaska. So what you can do is more limited in Alaska. Labor is expensive in Alaska. And land is hard to get because the government owns most of the land. So there's not just like big chunks of available land in Alaska anymore on the scale of Pleistocene Park. But I said, I'd be happy to research this. So my current job is researching what it would take to create a Pleistocene Park in Alaska. And there's a ton of scientific interest, and we'll see how that proceeds. I think it's plausible, but there's a lot of potential failure points as things stand right now. But there's also like there's a path forward, and I'm pursuing that. And I'm driving around. I was just up in Fairbanks. I drove down to Anchorage. I have some meetings down here. I'm going with a postdoc back up near Fairbanks to look at potential sites and discuss that with the people who manage the land, how feasible it would be. So it's moving ahead.
Well, very cool. I'm just, thank you for creating this really neat film and sharing it with us. What's a good way to kind of continue to follow your adventures and also spread word about the film?
Our American distributor has a site for the film. Our international distributor has a site for the film. Our American distributor is Bullfrog Films. International is Java Films. And then there is a page on Facebook that I have been a little bit lax on updating, but just because I've been insanely busy, and I try to keep off of Facebook, to be perfectly honest, because it will eat my brain if I let it. But the Facebook page is probably a good place to look, or find our distributors, Bullfrog or a Java, and they should have updates on the film.
Very cool. Well, thanks again for making this film, Luke. And for those of you that are watching this virtually before the live screening, help spread the word and see you at the Roxy on Friday, October 7th.
Yeah, everyone come to the Roxy. It's going to be really exciting. I'm going to be there.
Yeah,
Jed, producer, and Maureen Gosling, who edited it, who are both awesome veteran filmmakers, are going to be there.
So if you have a chance and you've watched this beforehand, come back and see the film or bring your friends. Thanks again,
Yeah,
Luke.
send your friends. Yeah, thank you, Chris.
Thanks again, man.